Hey guys, welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to learn how to write an exponential function given a graph, and specifically a graph that is related to a word problem. Let's dive into it. The problem says the graph represents a bacteria population Y. So we know that the bacteria population is represented in my y-axis after x days. The x-axis represents the number of days. And then it says, write an exponential function that represents a population. Well, exponential function, that means I need to write down an equation in the form of y equals a times b to the power of x. At least for algebra 1, that's how we see it. In algebra 2, it might change a little bit, but that's another topic. Well, there are two things that I need. The first thing that I need is the y-intercept. That is my A. A represents the y-intercept. And this is something that I have talked about in my previous videos. If you have not watched them, please pause this one and go back. That way you can understand what I'm talking about here. So A represents the y-intercept. Pause the video at this time and see if you can identify the y-intercept from the graph. Well, hopefully you paused the video. If you said that the y-intercept is 3, you are correct. The y-intercept can be found when x is equal to 0. You guys can see that. Let me move it a little bit. The y-intercept can be found when x is equal to 0. Okay. Then the next thing we have to find is what we call the common ratio, or the factor. Some people like to call it the factor, other people like to call it the common ratio. So in order to do that, since I know that the function is exponential and it's increasing by the same factor, what I can do is I can pick 2 points, whichever 2 points that I like, as long as they are consecutive. In this case, I'm going to pick 3, 375, and I'm going to pick 4, 1875. And what I'm really interested on is to identify how the y value is increasing, by which factor. So what I'm going to do in order to identify that factor is I'm going to divide y2 divided by y1. In this case, y2 is the second value of y. y1 is the first value of y that I picked. If I get my phone, let's see. Okay, here's a calculator. So I'm going to do 1875 divided by 375, and that gives you 5. So every single time, the values of y are increasing by 5. So 5 is my factor. Now it says, identify and interpret the y-intercept. Identify and interpret the y-intercept. Well, we know that the y-intercept is 3. And now the interpretation is probably the most important part here, because good mathematicians know exactly what numbers mean, at least most of the time. So if I'm talking about population and days, population of bacteria and days, well, what that means is that the y-intercept is 3, and what that means is that the initial population of bacteria is 3. Let me put a period there. So the y-intercept is 3, which means that the initial population of bacteria is 3. As long as you include this, the initial something, it might be population, the initial amount of money, the initial the initial weight. As long as the words the initial are included in your answer, it should be correct. Let's dive into the last two parts. It says describe the domain and range. We know that the domain it's by my x's. In this graph, all the possible values of x start from 0. All the possible values of x start from 0, and they go from 0 and they continue all the way to infinity. So I can just write it as x is greater than or equal to 0. And lastly, the y, well, not the y, sorry, the range of my graph will be y is greater than 3. Y is greater than 3. We know that our asymptote, well, not our asymptote, but since our graph starts at 0, 3, that's exactly where my graph, the y values of my graph start as well. So it will be y is greater than or equal to 3. 3 is the least y value that I can have in my graph. There is no other value below 3 that I will obtain if I look at this graph. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel. And please comment below if there is something that I can do for you. If there is a special topic that you would like me to cover in my videos, that will be great.